After so many days walking through a barren plain, our characters finally reached what not too long ago was the border of a realm. A small mountain stream and an ominous abandoned fortress is currently blocking them for advancing even further into their Uncharted Ways. How to move on indeed. Hi everyone, this is Daniel from Uncharted Ways, and as you can see, we're making today a diorama that is a bit more complex than our past projects. When making a small piece of terrain, it feels like it's quite obvious what's the first step, but not so much when there are multiple levels and structures. This feels like a reasonable concern. What if I have to redo something? What if something doesn't fit later on? Let me share with you my secret approach when making a diorama, big or small. General shape goes first. Think it this way. When you paint, first you draw your draft. Some triangles for the mountains, a lane for the horizon, etc. None of that will be probably shown later on. You will cover it or draw on top. But it works as a guide. Well, when making dioramas, your draft is the general shape. We're using foam to simulate the mountain. We're leaving some space for the river and the tower, etc. It doesn't have to look good, and it won't. Just make sure it's an approximate shape for what you're aiming at. Foam is your friend when making big pieces of terrain, but don't forget that you actually can use anything at your disposal. It's always better to reuse and recycle stuff, so if you'd want to know more about this or even how to make a diorama with only recycled items, please let me know in the comments. So now that we have a big foam structure, we have to carve it like a sculpture to look for the shapes that we're aiming at. Is this the only way of doing it? Of course not. Instead of carving, we could just have a bottom-up approach, building layers until we get the desired shape. The only thing is that that approach requires more time in terms of designing the specific pieces and waiting for drying. Sorry I blurred the image, but I don't want my girlfriend to find out I finished the cookies. Did you use our dreadful, annoying friend, the EPS foam, like I did? Congratulations, you also got a room full of small flying balls. But more important, you also got yourself a small issue. When you have XPS foam, it's easy to make clean cuts because it's a high density foam, which means that you will be able to paint over it or give it the shape that you want. However, with EPS foam, well, you can imagine its looks when cutting. I cannot imagine a diorama where that shape makes sense. That's why I'm using a modeling compound to cover everything. As it hardens, try to smooth it with your finger. As you see, we already have our general shape for the mountain done, so it's time to move on to our next draft. The small fortress on top of the mountain. Yeah, you got it right. That means making tons of bricks on the foam board surface. It cannot be helped. I'm using 1 cm foam board, but that's just a matter of preference. My only advice would be to measure the length of the walls that you need, and then use your rule to make fast the bricks. What's a good size for the bricks? Well, that's something that relates to the scale that you're aiming at. But if you're thinking at 32mm minis for D&D or Warhammer like I do, I'm doing them 5mm high. Okay, now that we're at it, let me show you a very easy trick if you have a hot wire cutter. Grab your foam and very lightly press it with the cutter. You can make really fast some cool details for the fortress wall. Of course, don't forget about giving texture to the rock wall with a mighty aluminum foil ball. I hope that by now it's a must in your hobbyist toolbox. By adding some stairs, our fortress shape is almost done. We just need to give it a proper floor. Once again, there are many ways of doing this, like carving them out of foam like we just did with the walls. However, I wanted to show you a different and faster way using cardboard. Just cut a bunch of rectangular shapes and start gluing them to any surface. I know that right now it feels like we went from realistic to chunky, but have a little faith in me. However, and despite your seeing me putting so much love and effort on that cardboard wall, well, it will prove to be a failure. Yes, that's right, it was a big mistake. This cardboard is very thin, so despite being a perfectly fine solution for covering the side of a diorama after being painted in black, it proved to be a very bad idea at this stage, but you'll see later on why. Okay guys, so we finally finished giving shape to our mountain, meaning the road and these areas, and also the castle part with the car box, and now it's just about giving shape by filling all these empty spaces and also giving shape to the rock walls that we made out of cardboard. So how are we going to do that? It's time for our rock wall. So let me share with you another inexpensive trick for making realistic rocks. So far we've been using either foam or modeling compound when we were making rocks, but now we're gonna use just plaster. Super easy and rewarding. Just grab some aluminum foil and wrinkle it with the shape that you want. Once again, randomness is your friend. Fold the edges so it can contain the plaster and just pour it in. When it's completely dry, it will be easily removed from the foil. And now, with my rock-shaped plaster, I will start adding it to our diorama. And because it's just plaster, I can easily break it into smaller pieces so it fits wherever I want to put it. As you can see, it looks great, very realistic and simple. What's the problem? Well, if you add it to a surface like foam, nothing, but on thin cardboard, the humidity of white glue and modeling compound on the recesses did the rest to actually ruin our cardboard walls. Well, lesson learned. I easily switched the cardboard with a foam board, and despite the small delay, we're ready to move on. So first we did our mountain draft, then our fortress draft, and for sure by now it feels we're getting closer to our final diorama. So what's next? You can say bringing it alive, imprint some character, look for its essence. The key thing is to understand that this is not about just adding details, but about shaping the terrain bearing a purpose in mind. We're making a mountain pass, so to me it makes sense to make a cobblestone road that goes up the fortress. Because we have our draft or general shape in place, now we should ask ourselves how the different elements of the diorama are going to fit together. And while we're here, let me introduce you to one of my favorite materials when making dioramas, air dry clay. It's not just super easy to handle, but really inexpensive and ideal for this kind of detail. What's the other key element that I envisioned for bringing our diorama alive? A wooden suspension bridge. Well, actually make it so. Of course, we will be using popsicles. Hi there, Popsy. No, this is actually quite straightforward. I'm gonna cut the popsicles and then... I put the popsicles. Sorry, Popsy. Take care. Oof, that was bad. Poor Popsy. Anyway, always try to reuse as many materials as possible. It's best for everyone. So back to our bridge. There are two main ways of doing it. And it depends on whether you want your bridge to be more or less rigid with the weight of minis. But anyway, with thin cord or a thread, you will get it done in no time. Just remember to damage a bit the popsicles with a hobby knife before you make the bridge, so you don't risk breaking it later on with the pressure. And of course our third bridge that will connect the road up the mountain with the desertic plains where our characters will be coming in their Uncharted Ways. In case you didn't see it, check the link to our desertic canyon diorama. What are we missing? Well, do you remember me saying don't worry about the looks now, we'll easily fix that, nasty looks are not important in this early phase? Well, this is when we deal with that. For instance, do you see these stairs? Well, we could have made them of the exact shape of the rock wall, but that would have taken us a huge amount of time and a small mistake would have meant redoing it. But we can also take some texture paste and fill all the gaps. Same goes for smoothing transitions with the rocks, or the places where our fortress meets its floor or the mountain. Our diorama is almost fully built, and now it's time to paint. As always, the first step is to prime it with the color of your preference. It doesn't have to be black. I'm using black gesso, but can you use just normal paint for this first layer? Well, depending on the material that you're priming, you might get on with it, but on foam it's gonna be super hard. If you try to use just paint, you'll see how it doesn't properly print the surface. So if you don't wanna buy gesso, add PVA glue and a bit of water to your paint, and that will do the trick. Once it's dry, I'll paint the rocks. But while I base coat everything, let me call my shadow clone so he shows you how to paint realistic rocks very fast. I have a very nice task for you this time. Do you wanna do a small tutorial on how to paint fast realistic rocks? Finally, yes! A decent task. I'll do it. Okay, I'll leave you with it then. What? Okay, fine. I'll leave. Hi everyone, this is Better Me, and today I'll show you how to paint fast, realistic rocks. First, base coat them with your main color. Yellow, brown, dark gray, light gray, black. Doesn't matter, just paint all of them with your bigger brush in that color. Second, the vibe. Use a blue if you want a really cold feeling, a green for super humid moss vibe, brown for sun or dirt. Try to use a darker color that you used for your base coat. Just really dilute your paint to a wash consistency and apply it everywhere. And third and last step, dry brush with a lighter color than the one you chose to base coat. And voila, you have in no time realistic rocks just like that. If you want them moving and dancing like on the video, that's another use. Before I move on to the last details, let me explain why I chose to paint the cobblestone road in this unusual way. I mentioned at the beginning how the general shape of the diorama relates to a draft in a painting. Well, this is kinda 3D painting, let's say. So through our palette of colors, we can also determine what matters most in the composition. Where do we want the eye to focus? This is a mountain pass, and I want to insist on the narrative idea of the road that our characters will be walking. I want it to stand out a bit, and therefore I'll be adding some variety to the cobblestones. You'll see how later on I'll tone it down and add sand and dirt, because in the end it's a road. But for now, let's play a bit with different levels of saturation in our ochres, browns and purples. For the fortress walls, I did the same as in our last video when making the tower, just going a bit lighter with the grays. And of course the river, an important part as it will be shown through epoxy. Because we have a main river and a tributary one, I decided to go heavier on browns and greens on the main one and different gradients of blue in our mountain stream. I included this part just so you see that it doesn't matter that much that we forgot or made a mistake, because everything can be fixed. Yes, it was done, but I made a big hole that I filled with clay, because I want to add yet another detail, simulating a structure of bricks holding the paved way. And was it necessary? Yes, because you should always aim at being happy with what you're making. There's no right or wrong, but your personal satisfaction. We're almost there. We're only missing details. With some thin wire, we'll shape a tree skeleton, and then some clay will help shape it if we let it dry. Some dirt on the trunk, brown on the branches, and a lot, and I mean it, a lot of rope cut in around 5mm length, fixed with glue and the same rope, painting with a light green, and we have a tree ready to be placed. Just let me use some oils for painting the popsicles, to cut a bit more rope to simulate vegetation in certain places, and this dollar store moss in crevices and even on the fortress wall, and we're ready for our final detail, sand. I use this drupal to have the biggest control possible. Adding sand and dirt both on the sides of the road but also in the middle of it and inside the fortress will help give an abandoned vibe. And don't worry for the excess, because as we're using diluted PVA glue, the rest will be easily removed with a brush. And finally, yes, I'm mentioning the title Epoxy Resin, and here it is. No clickbait. I'm using some tape to prevent epoxy from scattering, and also a layer of plexiglass because it will be easily removed, and we're ready to pour. I'm using a 2:1 ratio epoxy, which means that we need to be precise with the quantities so the mix reacts properly, otherwise it won't harden. And now it's just about pouring it. It sure looks great, watching epoxy pour down. You really need to wait for epoxy to harden, and just to be on the safe side, I let it dry overnight. After removing the tape, it's about making the water a bit shiny using some gloss mud pots, so it feels a bit more realistic. And here it is, our mountain pass with our stone tower ready. It sure was an experience, even if it took me a bit longer than I expected. But this diorama is a very complete one. We used EPS and XPS foam, cardboard, clay, plaster, a lot of different materials with different purposes, but all came together quite nicely, I'd say. Thanks for watching, and remember, it wasn't just clay, it was also a cobblestone road.